A long time ago, in the remote mountains of a faraway kingdom, an evil dragon woke up after 100 years of sleep. The king summoned all the knights and asked them to quickly go to the mountain and slay the dragon before he brought his ruin and his fire. But them, who had never fought such a formidable opponent, did not dare. The king made a second call, but the cowardly knights didn't show up. And for the third time, the king desperately asked them to prevent the tragedy by hunting down the enemy in the mountain, but once again, no one had the guts. Until one morning, when the first sunlight showed up behind the mountains, the shadow of the beast flew over the kingdom, and before anyone could react, the dragon descended upon them, devastating everything in its way. When all had been reduced to ashes and only smoke and debris remained, the dragon came down to earth and saw that there was one survivor. One of the knights was still standing. The young man was so frightened that he could barely breathe. His body was trembling, his legs shaking, and his heart pounding out of his chest. When the dragon approached, something unexpected happened. The young man's arm suddenly moved on its own and threw a stab that left the dragon blind in one eye. Again, dominated by an unknown power, he threw another stab, and this time he amputated the dragon's right claw. Immediately afterwards, his arm moved again on its own, and this time the stab cut the dragon's throat, putting the beast to death. Everything happened very quickly, in just a few seconds, and the knight, still trembling, fell to his knees and removed his helmet to recover his breath. In front of him, the dragon lay dead on the ground, and when he looked around him and saw all his neighbors, his friends, and his family reduced to dust, he finally understood the king's urgency. In that instant, he realized that if he had the courage to confront the dragon in its lair when he had the chance, he would surely have defeated it. But even if the dragon had torn him to pieces with its claws and scorched him with its fire, the knight knew that he would have rather died that way, bravely entering the darkest cave and facing his biggest fear, than ending up like this, victorious but alone and on his knees, defeated in his own victory, and with everything he once loved, lost because of his cowardice. The conquest of our personal freedom is the result of facing those situations that frighten us, but we know we must face and resolve because we can't let them dominate us any longer. Jordan Peterson says that the dragon must be slayed in its own lair, not at the door of our house when it's too late to avoid major damage and the price to pay is too high. But how? How do we face what terrifies us the most? One of the strategies that seems to work best, and the clinical literature on this subject is very extensive, is to voluntarily expose ourselves to our fear in small and feasible doses. You divide the big fear into small and more manageable fears. Tiny steps that you voluntarily take in a controlled environment at your own pace so it doesn't feel so scary. Peterson often uses the example of a person with agoraphobia whose fear is so intense that she's not even able to leave her home. She would love to have a social life outside the house, but her fear is crippling her. In this case, she obviously doesn't go straight into a party. The first step could be just opening the door of the house and putting one foot out, that's all. This might feel scary, but it's manageable and she agrees she can take it. Once she has slayed this little dragon, she can go further and take a few steps out of the house, and so on. When little by little you voluntarily face those small and manageable dragons, something very interesting happens. Your fear doesn't go away at all, but you become braver. You start relating to fear in a different way. This is the so-called hero's fear. You are perfectly aware that the dragon can tear you to pieces and that your chances of defeating it are probably minimal, which makes you feel completely terrified, but you still do what must be done. Every hero is afraid. Every hero has an intense fear and is perfectly aware of the evil, the danger, the catastrophe, and the suffering that he will encounter when he crosses the threshold. But he also knows that his ability to overcome all that is greater. Now, that courage is not going to magically appear by itself. The only way to allow it to emerge is to challenge yourself. Avoiding what scares you makes everything worse. It leads you to secretly despise yourself for having chosen to hide like a coward, waiting for the dragon to come to your door and eat you. You have to voluntarily confront the darkness that lurks and terrifies you. You have to act in spite of your fear. Of course, this is difficult, but listen to what the remarkable Stoic philosopher Epictetus says. Every difficulty in life presents us with an opportunity to turn inward and to invoke our own inner resources. The trials we endure can and should introduce us to our strengths. Dig deeply. You possess strengths you might not realize you have. Find the right one. Use it. Many people think that what stops them from becoming who they want to be is adversity, but it's quite the contrary. Seneca, another great Stoic philosopher, said, "I judge you unfortunate because you have never lived through misfortune. You have passed through life without an opponent. No one can ever know what you are capable of, not even you. No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." Dostoevsky stated that if the human being could create a utopian reality where problems do not exist and everything is happiness, we would take care of destroying it so that something exciting, unexpected, and problematic would happen. We need the dragon. Of course, it's scary to think that adversity is going to hit us eventually. The fear is there, that's for sure. But it's not the only thing that is there. There is something else. Something that we do not know and that we can all discover when we face the fearsome dragon that lurks in front of us.